Hello and welcome back to the Zero Lab. My name is Max and today I'll be going over my tournament report for the Baltimore Regional Championships. I'd never been to Baltimore before, it was my first time, but the venue was pretty nice. It was very big. It felt like we had a lot of space for like the stream setup and everything, so I definitely would not mind going back to Baltimore in the future. To this tournament, I played Snorlax Stall, which is a deck that I've been kind of grinding all last season. It was what I played to Worlds, and I decided it seemed pretty good into the meta going into Baltimore with Raging Bolt and Regidrago looking to be like they were going to be pretty played, and those did end up being the most played decks day 1 and day 2. And so my choice of Snorlax was, I think, a pretty good pick. It was mostly a standard list. I think most Snorlaxes played some copies of Mist Energies. I was on the 2 Mist Energies. It makes your Regidrago matchup much better, as long as being a switch card for other matchups. So pretty versatile cards there. I think Mist is pretty key in Snorlax now. I was only on 1 Rotom. I know most lists are on 2. I just decided that having the second Rotom definitely ups your consistency, but I wanted to try to find a way to cheat some space in the list, and so that was one of the first cuts I made, and I just decided, like, I'm not going to prize Rotom. If I do, I'll be able to find Heavy Ball, and it ended up not being too punishing for the run. There was only a couple games where I prized it, and I don't think that it was ever an issue, really. I was able to find my Heavy Ball most of the time. Going on, I had a Xerosix Machinations in the list. This was my answer for the mirror match, as well as just a card that speeds up games. It's really difficult sometimes when your opponent wins like a game 1 and then you're in a scenario where you have to try to win 2 more. That doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's nice to have Xerosix to just mill their hand down and shorten a game and give you a chance to win 2 games in a set if you need to. Thankfully, this tournament, I really didn't need to do that too much. I didn't need to play 3 games. Most of my wins were just win-win without taking any losses. But I had a couple games that went to 3. I'm on the 4 Flutes, which I know some lists were down to 3, but I think Flute's a broken card, and I wanted to make sure that I was seeing it early and often. 3 Palpad. I just felt like having 3 Palpad is nice because you get to play the best supporter in the matchup more often, and so, like, if you're playing only 2 Palpad and you like prize 1, it can make things kind of awkward being able to like loop Pennies or loop Misfortune Sisters or Aries. And so I really like having 3 for prizing purposes and for just being able to just spam the best supporter as much as you can. My recovery card was Night Stretcher. Since I'm not playing like the Chi-Yu Fire, Rod loses some value since you already have Yell Cheer to get Pokemon back too. Night Stretcher is really broken in matchups where you just want to throw like Mimikyus or Cornerstones into the active. I was on 3 Fans. Fan is just a card that I like a lot. I think it's really good into a lot of matchups, and it's really frustrating for decks like Guardy to run up against the Fan. And then finally, I think like what the biggest difference in my list versus other Snorlaxes that did well this tournament is the stadium count, in which I was on 2 League Headquarters and Neutralization Zone. Neutralization Zone was my choice of Ace Spec because I felt like it gave you another good win con versus some decks like Regidrago, where they're usually only playing 1 stadium bump, and so if they have to like research it away early, if they V-Star and then they don't take their stadium back, it's usually just a win count on the spot. Same thing goes with like playing as Guardy or Raging Bolt. Once you see some of those stadium cards hit the discard, which they play their stadiums like early to try to set up. Once you think that they're out of stadiums, you can throw this down, and it's usually just straight up a win con. And sometimes you can win a game 1 without ever showing it, and then you can just slap it down game 2 at the right moment and just completely blindside your opponent. And because I was playing the Neutralization Zone, I knew I needed to play a couple copies of another stadium that most decks would want to bump. I'd say League Headquarters is probably the most annoying stadium for like the largest majority of decks. Other options could have been Calamitous Wasteland, but that's kind of like doesn't have a ton of synergy since you usually are going to have Snorlax in the active anyway. And Temple of Sinnoh was the other option, but that really is only good against Lugia for the most part and a few other fringe decks. And so I decided to play 2 League Headquarters just to try to bait out Stadium Bumps for my opponent so Neutralization Zone could come in and win me a game. Moving forward to my matchups, I hit, of my 13 rounds, I hit all favorables, I'd say, except for 2 probably. Maybe 3. The Guardy matchup's a little bit interesting, but I'll get to that. So round 1, I played against a Raging Bolt opponent. He had kind of an interesting deck list in where he was not playing any switch cards, but he had 2 copies of Canceling Cologne. And so I did the usual strategy of just setting up a Mimikyu and making him deal with that with like a 1-prizer. But instead of using a 1-prizer, he just slapped down a Cologne and killed my Mimikyu. And I was like, okay, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I know I've seen some lists play it before, but it's not a very common card in the deck. And so I just send up another Mimikyu, and I was like, okay, this should be good. And then he throws down 2nd Cologne on his next turn and kills a Mimikyu, and I was like, okay, this guy's crazy. I don't know if what else he's got in here. He could have a 3rd Cologne, but as the game went on, it looked like he didn't. And so he was unable to get through the 3rd Mimikyu that I Night Stretchered back. And then by that point, I just kind of knew his whole deck list. He didn't have any switching cards. His A spec was Stamp, I believe. And so he just really didn't have a good out to something getting trapped. So I just fluted a Greninja out and just bossed it. And he didn't really have any options of moving the Greninja after that. Round 2 was pretty funny. I hit another Snorlax player. We flip over the cards. I had won the coin flip, and he immediately asks for the ID. And that tells me he's not playing any cards for the mirror. So I declined because I'm playing Xerosix, Machinations, and Iono, and so eventually you can deck them out with that combination. And so I draw for turn, I play my Heavy Ball, it's in my opening hand, I see Xerosix Machinations is in my prize cards, and so I immediately offer the ID because there's no way this game can resolve, and we just tie. Moving on to round 3, I hit a Charizard player. Charizard can be kind of a tricky matchup sometimes. If they're playing the Ghosts, which all the Zards I hit in this run were playing like a 2-1-1 line of the Dusknoir, I believe. And so it's really key to mill their Super Rods, so that way they can't just like continuously blow up their Ghosts and deal with your Mimikyus and Ogerpons that way. Another card to look out for is Canceling Cologne, which this Zard player did play, but I was able to mill the Rods and the Cologne fairly early on in the matchups, and there wasn't a whole ton he was able to do about it. And so round 4, I sit down across from my opponent, and he flips over a baby Roaring Moon, and I go, oh no, this is probably not going to be a good matchup. I just have to hope he's not playing Turbo Moon, because that's an unwinnable matchup, and just hope he's playing Ancient Box. Well, he was playing Ancient Box, and so that was good, but the issue was he was actually playing the Petrant in there, which is basically unwinnable. There's like a slight line you can take with League Headquarters and Fans and just hope you can spread the energy out thin enough, but it's just I was drawing too slowly. He was able to kill my Rotom early, and it's a really tough matchup. It's almost unwinnable with the Petrant, and so take that loss. There's not much you can do about it. I wasn't really expecting to win the matchup, and so now I'm sitting in a spot where I have 2 wins, a loss, and a tie, and so any more ties or losses will knock me out of day 2 in contention at this point, so I have to win out. So going into round 5, I hit a Regidrago, which is definitely a matchup I want to see. I have the Mist Energies, I have double Cornerstone, double Mimikyu. That's a lot of things for them to deal with, and so it all just comes down to, are you able to mill some of their key resources before they get to use them and V-star them back? And then you just have to see what you mill and make them choose between these key resources. Neutral Zone, again, goes pretty hard in this matchup if they're either not playing a Stadium out or if they discard their Stadium out early because they don't think they'll need it. So I won that one pretty convincingly. Round 6, I hit another Zard player, and he said he was a pretty new player, but he played very, very well. I won a long game 1, And it was kind of tough. He was playing the Ghost. He didn't have Canceling Cologne, but he did have a bunch of ways to get Ghost back. He had, Thornton, a couple rods. I think he had a Night Stretch or two. And so in game 2, he chooses to go second, and he has just the absolute god setup. He has everything he wants. He has a full, the double Ghosts on the board. He has Arven in hand. And he's just ready to, blow up a bunch of Ghosts and cause some issues for my board. And so I knew I needed to hit his rods as soon as possible. And so on the first turn that I could play Supporter, I just Seal Stone for Misfortune Sisters. And somehow I miraculously hit double Super Rod, which basically just won me the game on the spot. And so that was extremely lucky, and I think he definitely could have had me if I was unable to pull off such a crazy play. So it was kind of lucky, but we'll take that. In any tournament run that you do really well in, definitely you're going to need to have some luck go your way. Moving on to round 7, I hit another Regidrago player. Actually, it was a local of mine who we've played several times. He's a good friend of mine. And we both know the matchup's pretty favored for me, but there's always things that can go wrong. If Snorlax draws poorly, Regidrago can just sometimes run you off the board. And so he does end up beating me in one of the games. And I guess I have it wrong on my little report, but we did actually go to 3 games. And the issue was we didn't have enough time for Game 3 to resolve, so we were just going to have to go off board state after time was called and after our 3 turns. And he was kind of destroying me in this Game 3, and I was like, man, I'm going to have to give it to him. He still had a Cologne in the deck, and I had a lone Mimikyu active. He was kind of spent on all his other resources. He didn't have very many cards left in the deck. And I had a 0-card hand going into turn 3 of time. And in my 30-card deck, I had 1 Misfortune Sisters, and I just needed my top deck to be Misfortune Sisters or a gear to hit Misfortune Sisters. And that's what it was. I top deck Misfortune Sisters, I play it, I hit his last Cologne and his Rod, and at that point, there's not really a way he can take out this last Mimikyu, and so he gave it to me, so that was definitely cool of him, and I appreciate him holding up the gentleman's. And so now I'm moving on to round 8. I just hit another Raging Bolt player. Again, pretty easy matchup. You just have to make them deal with your Mimikyu. If they can't, you win, and if they do, you just kind of trap whatever they have to deal with your Mimikyu. If it's like Sandy Shocks, you just put a fan on your Snorlax and you fan away all the fighting energies, and it's a pretty easy game. And so, yeah, that I was very happy to see that in my round 8. And then round 9, I hit another Raging Bolt player. And again, kind of same thing. This is just a very, very favorable matchup. It was definitely the deck I wanted to hit the most out of everything in the meta. And so I was happy to see that on my winning in to day 2. So I finished day 1 going 7-1-1, which is the best I've ever finished in a day 1. I've always come into day 2 going 6-2-1. So it was nice to improve on that facet. So now going into day 2, it's a little bit different because last year it was 6 rounds in day 2. This year we're only having 4 rounds if there's 2,000 people. And so, so starting off, I hit Ancient Box. And I was like, oh man, the big thing in this matchup is, does he play Pecharunt? He did not play Pecharunt. Thankfully, I don't think I could have won if he did. But he did have a pretty strong start. I had a very slow start game 1, and he kind of just bodied me. But then game 2, with the fans and the double league headquarters, just kind of made it so he couldn't really do much. He wasn't playing Penny. He said he had cut Penny the night before, and so I was just able to get Iron Bundle into the active in game 2 and go just lone Snorlaxes so he has no boss target. And so he just scooped, and then game 3, I was able to flute out the Ancient Dom fan, Great Tusk. Yeah, the Great Tusk that mills. And he tried, and it was tough because, he tried to mill, but the problem with that is that, you're milling yourself with your own supporter cards more than you're milling your opponent. And so I was able to shuffle enough cards back into the deck, and he decked himself out. And so I was thankfully able to win that matchup. That was a really scary one. It's not a matchup I particularly wanted to see, but my specific text, the league headquarters, really came through for this matchup. Round 11, I hit a very interesting deck. I hit Blood Moon Valiant. I believe he was the only Blood Moon Valiant in day 2. I'm sure he was. And so I had never played this matchup before. And it was kind of interesting because they play so many switching cards, but they have a really hard time getting through Cornerstone Mask. Their only way to really deal with it is Mew genome hacking your Cornerstone. And so in game 1, he took out a Snorlax with one of his Blood Moons, and then I sent up Cornerstone, and he used Mew to swing into it, and then I just kept trying to mill Switch King cards and bringing up his Blood Moon because it has a 4 retreat cost. And so eventually he ran out of switching cards. He ran out of energy to retreat the Blood Moon, and then we went to game 2, in which he tried not to bench a Blood Moon and just go lone Mew. But because of that, I was able to fill his board with non-attackers, and so the only thing on his board that could attack was Mew. And after he knocked out one of my Snorlaxes, Mew just gets walled by Rotom with a Defiance Vest on it because Mew does 0 damage copying Rotom's attack unless they lost on some of their tools. But he only played like 4 tools, so he was never going to be able to take a KO on Rotom that way. So I was happy I was able to figure that one out on the fly. Yeah, definitely an interesting matchup, and I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot more to that matchup, and I wonder if it's not as good as that matchup made me think it was for Snorlax. Round 12, I hit I hit a guy who had just aged up from seniors. He had gotten top 4 at the Worlds in Honolulu with Gardevoir, and he was running Gardevoir back. This is kind of an interesting matchup. At Worlds, I played Snorlax, and I played a Picnic Basket in my list specifically for the Gardevoir matchup to heal damage off of Screamtail and make it a bad attacker. Because Screamtail is typically the best attacker in the matchup for Gardevoir. They just want to start sniping bench things so they can play around Handheld Fan. But it didn't seem like he maybe knew that line, and so I was able to just just keep trapping routes. You keep counter-catching routes up with League Headquarters in play and Handheld Fan, and eventually they just run out of energy and they can't really do anything. And then round 13, I hit Henry Chow. I got up-paired to him. I was thankful to get up-paired to him because looking at what I could have played, it was a lot of bad matchups. My local Emmett Hurley, who got top 4 with Turbo Moon, I could have hit him instead. I think there was a Lugia at that point that I could have hit, and there was a Raging Bolt. So I was hoping to hit the Raging Bolt, but I ended up hitting Henry instead, getting up-paired to Henry. And man, Henry Chow is a cracked Gardevoir player. He knew all the lines. His deck was super well positioned to do well against block. He wasn't playing Manaphy. He had triple Bravery Charm, so he was able to do the load up energy onto a routes with Bravery Charm and then evolve it to Curlia to KO it as a way to remove routes from your board and a way to turn on your counter catchers, which is definitely the best line to do in this matchup. And he knew the matchup front and back. And so he kind of just bodied me in game 1. And then game 2, thankfully, the only key that saved me and allowed me to tie him was that he hadn't seen my neutralization zone yet. And so in game 2, I'm able to get Fez into play. And then he made a slight misplay where he turtled the Fez up after he had refinemented it. So he had no way to get the Fezandipity into his discard pile. And so next turn, I was able to just Erica's it back out. And then later on in that game, he Ultra Balled away his only Stadium out, which was his own copy of League Headquarters. And as soon as he did that, I knew I could win because he had no way to get through my neutralization zone. So I put that down. We played a couple more turns and he scooped. And then we went into game 3 with 11 minutes left, and there's just no way that matchup's ever finishing. And so we tied. Definitely thankful that Henry was such a good sport because he definitely could have slow played me after a really long game 1 and just taken a win. But I think, it just didn't really. He was since he got down paired and I got up paired, he only needed a tie to make cut, and I had to win. And so a tie wasn't really that bad for him. He was just trying to get out of the asymmetrical cut, or had a better chance of getting out of asymmetrical cut. But I think it ended up working out, for both of us because the tie put me into top 16. And he ended up winning the whole thing, so that was awesome to be able to play against a player as good as Henry. Yeah, and so that was my run with Snorlax at these regional championships. I think it was a really sick play. I think there was something like 45 Snorlax players in day one, and 11 of them made day two, so a 25% conversion rate, which is just insane. Just by far the best converting deck. And so I think at the next regionals, it's in a different format, but there could be some more respect in deck building towards stall decks. They did very well this weekend. There was, I think, 3 Snorlax decks in top 16. A bunch of control decks did well. And so we'll have to see. I think Snorlax gains a lot of great tools in the Stellar Crown format and still has a lot of really great matchups. And so we'll have to see if Snorlax is still going to be one of these decks that can just show up and do really well. Well, thanks for tuning in to this video, and we'll see you next time on the Zero Lab.